it a session is starting now. Mm.
Yes, please. So I would like to start today's session. Today's session is an extremely important session, and this session is dedicated on World Mental Health Day, which is 10th of October. In the times of pandemic and otherwise, the healthcare sector and healthcare workers are under a lot of stress, and they undergo a lot of mental conditions which go unnoticed and not spoken about. We face a lot of difficulties, but these difficulties are always kept under the carpet. Now, this particular session is something that has decided to bring all these topics out with the help of my mentor, Dr. Sanjiv Nair, who has graciously accepted my invitation to moderate this session. Thank you so much, sir. And Dr. Steve Joordens, he is another very gracious professional who has agreed to grace us, and he'll be introduced by Dr. Sanjeev. But I would like to introduce Dr. Sanjeev. Professor Sanjiv Nair is an MDS, FDS, FFP, RCS, FDS, RCPS, FIP, SCMS. He's a professor and head of Bangalore Institute of Dental Sciences, lead consultant, and in maxillofacial surgery, BJMC, by Bhagwan Mahavir Jain Hospital. He's a vice president elect of IOMS and past president of AOMSI in the year 2014 to 15. He's a past editor-in-chief, JOMS, in the year 2011, 2013. Sanjeev, sir, a warm welcome to you.
Yeah. Hi. Thanks,
Hi.
Sanjit. Yeah, it's interesting because you have been quite instrumental in bringing a lot of interest and I'm sure that it'll catch up with a lot of our professionals if it has not already caught up with them, which I think is important. So one of the most important things is health, which is whether physical or mental, has been something which has been taken for granted by especially the medical profession. Uh, I mean, nobody takes care of their own. I mean, there is a old adage saying, "Physician, cure thyself." So if you remember
Yes.
that, yeah, it's
Yes.
always that. It's been, and more so in the case of mental health because it's a big taboo, but an existential problem amongst the medical professional, especially interestingly from a uh, journal or a article which you shared with me of the American Psychiatric Association in 2018 had
Yes.
come out with this very interesting statistics of one doctor committing suicide every day, which is like a staggering number considering the number of doctors they have in the US. So it's like a
Yes.
staggering number. Yeah, it's quite a staggering number. So it is a number which has not been addressed, and ironically, to tell you, I mean, I will introduce our esteemed speaker soon, but Professor Joggins, it's psychiatrists who are the maximum number of people who have committed suicide during the entire year. So we come back to the same thing: physician,
Yes.
cure thyself.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the rate of depression 14.5% female doctors. So let me introduce. I have a great pleasure in introducing our esteemed speaker, Professor Joordens. Steve, as I would address him during the rest of our session, if he doesn't mind, was formerly trained as cognitive psychologist, and he has taught many different psychological courses, both at the University of Toronto and online at the Coursera.org. He has also won several awards for his teaching and his teaching innovations at the institutional, provincial, and national levels in Canada, and has been named as a 3M Canadian Teaching Fellow in 2015. At the outset of the pandemic, he created a free online course to help people understand and manage the anxiety that comes with living through the pandemic. So this, I mean, currently is a time when we are all going through a situation where we have had to modify the way we treat our patients without having a direct physical contact with them. So, Steve will be the right person to tell us about the anxieties we face today and how best to deal with it. Steve, uh, here you are.
Thank you, Sanjiv. And let me just begin by saying it's been a real pleasure so far to be interacting with Sanjiv and Taranjeet as we've been talking about all this. I've learned a lot about the Indian context, and I hope to give you something of value here today. In fact, as Sanjiv said, at the beginning of this pandemic, I myself was feeling quite anxious, and that's very normal because we were facing the unknown. We had no idea what was ahead of us, what path, and our brain really likes to predict things. It likes to know things. And so when it doesn't know things, we all feel anxious. So I sense that. And I also know that while there is a taboo around mental health issues in India, there is one generally as well, throughout the world. And I thought, this is a good time to start talking about especially anxiety, and I think especially to doctors, because as you'll see, most of the story I'm going to tell you today is more a story of human biology and physiology than it is about, any deep psychological issues. This is about our body and how our body responds to threat and uncertainty. So it's a pleasure to tell you this story today. I look forward to doing so. I may pause every now and then along to ask questions, and we will certainly have time for questions at the end. So let's just jump into the actual presentation then. Okay, so I'm hoping to do three things primarily today, do things in three chunks. First of all, I want you to understand what anxiety is, and especially to some extent what it isn't, that it isn't weakness, for example. It isn't a human response to weakness. It's in fact something quite different and something that evolved for a very good reason and continues to play a useful role in our lives in certain situations. But the problem is this thing can go wrong. It's not meant to deal with chronic stress. And when we get chronic stress, things happen. And so that will relate to the question of, why do you need to manage your anxiety? Can't you just, let it go? And I'll show you what happens if you do that. And it's not a good story. So we'll talk about, why there is a need to manage. And then of course, near the end of this, okay, how do I do this? Now, let me be clear about something, by the way. I am not a clinical psychologist. I do not do therapy. I am more of a scientific psychologist. In fact, a lot of my research is on educational psychology, how to use technology to enhance education. But because I've taught so much psychology, I know psychology very well. But what I'm going to talk to you today about is not therapy. That I would put into the category of what I call mental illness. And we may touch on that a little bit. But I'm going to talk more about what I'll call mental health. Making sure your mind is as strong as possible because of all the challenges you're going to face. Okay, so let's jump into the story and let's just start here with the beginning of just trying to understand what anxiety is. And it really is a very clever adaptation or evolution of our nervous system, quite literally, to support both long-term and short-term survival. So here's what I mean about that. When we're living in a much more natural kind of situation, some of our behaviors were about keeping us alive for a very long time. So hunting, gathering, eating, those sorts of things. Some of the behaviors suddenly change when we're under immediate threat. So if a predator emerges, now it's suddenly about short-term survival. And our body has adapted a really interesting approach for dealing with those two sort of lengths of survival. A lot of this you might know about a little bit, but let me kind of walk you through this and just make sure it all makes sense as we go through. So here's your brain, and this part specifically is part of the midbrain, so our basic limbic system here. And the limbic system, critically for today's talk, includes these two almond-shaped parts on our brain called the amygdala. The amygdala are kind of, is Spider-Man big in India? I don't know if Spider-Man has made it to India, but Spider-Man, one of the superheroes, in our culture, has the spider sense, okay. So he will always say, my spider sense is tingling, and that's telling him there's some danger or something around. We all have a spider sense. It doesn't quite work like Peter Parker's. It's not just tingling and we're looking around. It, in fact, kicks us into action. It's much more extreme. But it's the amygdala. All of our sensory input from the world is filtered through this limbic system, and the amygdala specifically is looking for threats. It's looking for something that could be a threat to our existence, and it's very it doesn't have to be a major threat. Like, it could be the threat of social embarrassment, for example. Just being embarrassed in front of others is enough for this system to kick in. And so when it senses threat, it sort of flips a little switch in our biology. So let's talk about that a little bit. So our central nervous system with our brain and spinal cord, but then we have the peripheral nervous system. And the peripheral nervous system is how the brain communicates with the body, the sensory organs, but all of the organs that do digestion and breathing and circulation of blood, all of those things. And it controls them a little bit through nerve tracts, but also through hormones, through releasing hormones. And there's really two different states that our bodies end up in, and they're very much related to that long-term versus short-term survival. So let me kind of walk you through this with a bit of a story. Let's say you've had a very busy day, and finally you get to go home and relax. And let's just imagine you live alone. And so there you are sitting there relaxing at home. What does your body do then? It enters this parasympathetic mode. We sometimes call this the rest and digest mode, because that kind of captures what your body does. So we see the following sort of things happen. Your pupils constrict. It's kind of like the exterior world isn't all that important anymore. You're kind of relaxing. And we see a lot of digestive process. So your saliva, you produce more saliva. There's activity in the stomach, all the way through the intestines and the bladder. Basically, what that is doing is you've consumed food during the day, and it's now separating the nutrients and the valuable parts of the food from the waste. It's delivering the nutrients to your body, and it's eliminating the waste. That's all about keeping the body strong, making sure that for the long term, your body is physically strong. If we also look at things like our respiration and our heart rate, what we tend to see here are big, deep breaths, slow, deep breaths when a person is relaxed, and we see the heartbeat slow down. Okay, so slow heartbeat, slow deep breaths, all this digestion going on. And that's when you're sitting there. Okay, so now let's imagine you suddenly hear a loud noise in one of your bedrooms, a smashing of a window, and you're home alone. This is when your amygdala goes, oh, it hears that and it says danger, and it flips the switch, and you go into this mode very quickly, because it had to be very quick the way it evolved. So very quickly, everything changes. Things right to your sense organs, your pupils dilate. You become very aware of the world around you. Sometimes people say things move in slow motion because it seems like you're perceiving the world so well around you. Your digestive processes stop. It's like, forget that long-term survival right now. There's a threat in the other room. I have to deal with it. And what we see with the heart rate and the respiration is respiration becomes much shallower and quicker. So more like a panting kind of respiration. The heart rate increases significantly. And what this is doing is it's your body pumping oxygen-rich blood to all of your muscles. Okay, and as we know, the muscles use the oxygen to perform. So usually they have a certain amount of oxygen, but when you're in this mode, they get more oxygen, and we become super strong, super fast. We call this fight or flight mode, because literally, as opposed to rest and digest. So fight or flight, the idea is there's a danger there. You now have to do something. You have to either fight that danger that's there, or you have to get the heck away from it. Either way, you can survive. So fight it or flee it. We sometimes, by the way, talk about another state called freeze. Sometimes it takes people a while to decide to fight or flee. And so they just freeze for a while their brain is sort of processing the information, but then they fight or they flee. Okay, this state is anxiety. When we talk about anxiety, we're talking about our bodies being in this state. But let's get there. Let me just say, first of all, why do we do this? Well, again, to be prepared to deal with things that happen. So it's really meant for situations like this. So what do I mean by this? The implication might be that there is a child or something trapped under this vehicle. And this police officer came around and saw that there was a child trapped. entered sympathetic mode, so went into that fight or flee mode. I have to do something, I have to do something. And now suddenly she has the strength to lift the car, which to the amazement of the people watching, because you wouldn't expect a woman like that to be able to lift the car from the front end where the engine is. This is a heavy part of the car. But this is the kind of thing we can do when we're in sympathetic mode. So this evolved because our major stressors at the time were things like predators that suddenly emerged. And so we had to suddenly, run as fast as we can, and we need our super speed to get away from it, or we needed to fight it. And again, we need all our strength and all our power to do that. It continues to be useful, just like this picture shows in the modern world. When threats are what we call acute, when they show up and you can deal with them and then they're gone, that's what the system was meant to do. Because once the threat is gone, it can relax again. So it's meant to be a system that just comes into action, use it to what you need to use it for, and then it usually goes away. Okay, that's how it's meant to work. But this is where the problem comes in. So sometimes things in our current life are acute stresses. So if you have to give a presentation, you might be nervous about that, right? And so you go into that presentation and you feel everything I've just told you about. You feel your heart is beating fast, you're breathing, you might feel sweat, by the way. That's your body preparing to cool you because it knows you're going to fight or flee. So it's trying to get yourself cool. So all of those things you could feel, but of course, once you give the presentation, it's done. And you walk away and you go, oh, okay, that went okay. And now you're going back to rest and relax mode. That's how it's supposed to work. And so there's various other examples like this we could talk about. The problem happens when the stress is chronic. So things like a bad relationship, a stressful job. So you guys have a stressful job. So let me just say that those stats that Sanjiv gave you, if you listen carefully, he said 2018, the medical profession was stressed and feeling a lot of anxiety in 2018. If it wasn't 2018, what are you guys feeling now? I mean, that was pre-pandemic, right? And now then the pandemic hit and made your jobs probably, well, we can talk about some of the additional stressors, but you have a very stressful job. So the acute stress, the bears that come out, and do you guys have bears in India? I don't know if you have bears. This is a good Canadian bear for you here. But if a bear jumps out, that's an acute stress. That's what this system was made for. But something like coronavirus, even for the general public, like forget about doctors for a moment, even to the general public, they know it's dangerous. It's very mysterious. They don't know how it's dangerous. It's not going anywhere. Every morning we wake up and it's still there. And so these are the problematic things. They make that previous system, sorry, I'm just going to jump back here for a second. This becomes something that's engaged more than it should be. Like sometimes most of our day, we're all humming along in fight or flee mode. And you probably feel that. You feel that anxiety. You may, by the way, smell other humans more. This is one of the interesting things I've noticed as I talk to people. When they say, well, I don't know if people are stressed, I say, do you notice more body odor in your work environment? That's not because people aren't cleaning themselves. They probably are, but it's because they're always a little fight or flee, and we release sweat when we're in that fight or flee mode. And so people are literally sweating more. And that's sometimes the thing people can detect because we have very sensitive smell organs. So we sense, why aren't these people cleaning? Why aren't they taking care of themselves? They probably are. They're just very anxious. Okay. So you have that idea. The system evolved for one reason, but the modern world is keeping this system engaged longer than it should be. And that's the problem. So I want to begin by kind of having you think about things this way. I'm going to begin talking about why you need to manage anxiety, and that starts to feel like, oh, there's that mental health taboo. Well, let's first of all just say, what have we been talking about? We've been talking about physiology. We've been talking about the body, right, and how the body responds to threat. you guys are in an extremely stressful job. So there's an analogy I would like you to consider. So let's imagine this person is an athlete for, let's say, the Indian Olympic team. I don't know what he does, but let's say he's an athlete for the Indian Olympic team, and he knows, hey, I have all these competitions coming up, and those competitions are going to challenge my body. It's going to be very hard on me physically to get through all of these competitions. If I want to do this and not get hurt, then I'd better have a strong body. And so an athlete will often spend time in the gym or do other lifestyle kinds of things to make sure that their bodies are as strong as possible, so that they're ready to face a challenge. You guys are athletes, but your challenge isn't so much physical, although you probably have physical challenges too. But your challenge is anxiety. It's exactly what I just showed you, chronic anxiety. Let's talk about your job for a moment here. These are things this is a graphic, again, pre-pandemic, and you know this world better than I do. The funny thing I saw when I looked at this graphic is how much of this was about policy of healthcare. And, even, for example, they have here well-intended stressors. So these are things that are supposed to be making your professional better, like healthcare reform. Yeah, but when you're trying to work and people are trying to tell you to do things differently because it'll be better, that's a source of stress as well. So all of these things, if you just look around a little bit, I bet, personal life, time and money to attain and maintain, the education and training, debt management, personal and social sacrifices, home life demands and stressors. So when you're a doctor, you're getting it from all of these sides, always. So it's always a stressful position. But during COVID, there's been a really kind of interesting dynamic that's been going on. First of all, you haven't had the supplies you need. So you've been expected to do your job with minimal supplies. You've had way more patients. You've seen way more death. And so, you've been in crisis mode. You've had high mortality. And let's talk about this bereavement point, because Sanjiv mentioned one part of that, which is you're now sort of in one way more distant from your patients, because you have to have more protective gear. You have to, be worried about the virus. So in a way, it's like a less human interaction with the patients. But in another way, because there is no family there and the family cannot be there, you are sometimes sort of the surrogate family. You are the closest human being that can be around them. And we all feel that human need to connect with somebody that we know needs that social connection. So I'm betting that you guys are living in this weird world where you feel disconnected from your patient by the, outfits and stuff you wear, but potentially you feel more connected to them. You may be finding you're getting to know them a little bit better because their husbands and wives and mothers and fathers are not there and they need a human. And so you and the nurses and the other healthcare professionals are the humans. And if you do start to form relationships with these people and then they pass away, that's even harder, right? Now you have real personal bereavement going on. You used to be able to let the family be the human connection and you could be the medical expert. Now you're a little bit of both. And so you're seeing a lot of death and it's personally potentially affecting you a lot deeper than it normally would. And so this is chronic stress, right? If I ask you every day, does somebody die that's around you every day? How many other professions would imagine that somebody is dying around them, on a regular basis? And so I'm sure you guys could all tell me stories. I'm almost tempted, actually, maybe. We'll hear stories at the end. I was almost tempted to have one of you guys tell me a story just to illustrate this point, but I also want us to keep on time. So let's not go too far. This is the critical thing here. So this is the work of somebody named Hans Selye at McGill University in Montreal, Canada. Yay, Canada. It's a critical work in psychology and in this issue of health. Because Hans Selye was the first to directly ask the question, can the state of your mind affect your body? And so he was looking specifically at stressors and chronic stressors. And what he found amongst a bunch of individuals when he kind of looked at the response of their physiology to a prolonged, to a chronic stress, is that we have these sort of 3 stages. An original alarm stage at first when something like COVID, let's say, kicks in, we have this depression at first, but it doesn't last very long. It's like the body is kind of like, in a negative state. But then this is when our system really kicks in, and we're fighting the stress. So imagine those times at the beginning of the pandemic when you were in there and you were working hard every day and you just almost felt super strong, maybe super powerful, doing stuff. That's your sympathetic nervous system. And you can ride that feeling for a while. But at some point, so when this, let me be clear about this, which I wasn't. When the sympathetic nervous system is engaged, it's flooding your body with cortisol and adrenaline, 2 hormones. And they are the ones that give us that strength as well and help us deal with pain. But if they stay in our body too long, they start to damage the body. And so this is what Selye showed, is that prolonged stress, just having this worry on your mind all the time, would eventually negatively affect your body because it would result in the release of these hormones. And eventually you reach this exhaustion stage. We call this burnout sometimes. And so let's sort of talk about this line here. This is a line between being active, like feeling what I just told you about, that sympathetic nervous system. When that's kicked in, you feel kind of ready to fight. You feel ready to go. Like, come on, let's do it. But after a prolonged period of that, you can feel your fight leave. You can feel a state that we sometimes call learned helplessness, where you feel like, I've been doing this for months and I'm not making a difference. And that's when you're reaching this exhaustion stage. And it's marked by a desire to stop fighting. You literally feel this sort of give up feeling, like, I can't do this anymore. And that's the exhaustion stage. And so you really don't want to reach this. And the people that reach this, by the way, it's not because they're weak that this happens. This will happen to everybody. If you give them prolonged stress, it's going to happen to everybody unless they know how to live a lifestyle that gives them a break every now and then and allows those hormones to leave their system. If you don't have those breaks, you are going to hit that line, and it's simply because of your body, your physiology. That's the way it works. Here's a little, just a chart that sort of shows the same ideas of these different stages. And by the way, I will share all of these slides, or I actually already have with Taranjeet and Sanjiv, so maybe they can make them available as well. But you get the idea here of what's going on. And so when we're in this resistance stage, which you guys have been in for a very long time, this is when cortisol is released and all unnecessary functions are shut down. You may have found, by the way, that you have digestive issues over this COVID period of various sorts, anything from body cramping to just not using the washroom as regularly as you did before. That's again because your body's in fight or flight mode. It's not in rest and digest as much, and it needs to digest that food as well. So the story behind all of this is quite simply, you need to get a break from anxiety every now and then. You cannot live in a state of continual anxiety. You will crash simply because your body insists on that. Okay, so what can you do? I'm just going to give you a few quick tips here, and then we're going to go into question and answer period because I'd like to respond more to your specific things. But let me just give you 5 lifestyle changes, maybe changes, that can help you be that athlete. How can you be best capable to handle the anxiety? Yeah, how can you be this guy? So you have high levels of chronic stress that are going to challenge your body too. And it is your body that's challenging, by the way. It's not your mind that breaks when you burn out. It's your body. And so what can you do to adopt a lifestyle of health? Okay. This is a big ask, I understand. I talk to police officers, I talk to healthcare professionals, and I talk to all these people with very stressful jobs. And this is my number 1 tip, and almost every one of them can't do it, which is frustrating for me because this is the foundation of good mental health. literally, if you can sleep well and if you eat well, you're going to be healthier. And the way to sleep better is to lead a very structured life where you wake up at the same time in the morning, you go to bed at the same time at night, you have your meals at the same time roughly. When you do this, all of the biorhythms of your body get synced up to your life, and you feel tired when it's time to go to bed, you feel alert when you wake up, and generally your body is better able to handle all stressors. Now, I always say this one, and then the police officers or the doctors say, yeah, we can't do that. We're expected to work all sorts of different times, and there's no way I could have a structured life like that. I think that's a shame. I honestly think in high chronic stress jobs like yours, we should find a way to allow doctors to lead a structured life if we want them to be able to handle the stress. Okay, here's some ones you can do though. Minimize your exposure to things that increase your anxiety. So those of you that don't think your mind affects your body, what happens when you watch the news for too long? And if you're watching the news and following the news all the time, when you walk away from the news, what's on your mind? What are you thinking about? Well, what you just saw, and statistics, and is this ever going to end, and all that stuff. And so you're walking away, but you're carrying the news with you. And that's going to continue to make you anxious because that's the threat, right? It's all talking about the threat. And so that makes you anxious. So try to minimize those things. If things make you anxious, if certain people make you anxious or certain events in your life make you anxious, try to minimize your exposure to that. And in turn, try to find things that take your mind off the stress. This can be anything. This is highly personal. I'll give you an example. At the beginning of the pandemic, I learned how to use GarageBand. It's this software that allows you to make songs. So you can play music and you can make songs. And I never had time to learn it. But I did during the pandemic. And when I go down in the basement and I'm creating a song, COVID disappears. I mean, the only thing on my mind is what I'm creating at that time. And so that's an escape. That's a behavior for me where I can get away from COVID for a little while. And I schedule that into my day. I try every day to spend at least a half an hour or an hour just writing songs and playing with this thing because it gets me away from COVID and it gives that hormone rush a chance not to happen. Even better, if there are activities that make you happy. So the West has stolen some Eastern ideas, and one of the Eastern ideas that we stole is mindfulness. And so becoming mindful about your mental state, just realizing, hey, I just did something, and maybe it was watching a TV show. I just watched some silly TV show, and I feel good right now. It made me laugh, and it made me feel good. Oh, that's medicine. If you recognize that, can you do that? Can you watch that TV show, other times? Can you schedule that into your life? Because it's making you feel good. These are the things that typically make us feel good: singing, dancing, laughing, being social. So chatting with other people that we really love, that are important to us, being thankful for the things we have. When we do these things, not only do we prevent the adrenaline and the cortisol from rushing, we in fact replace it with other hormones that are much more positive to our mental health. And so it's literally kind of like flushing the anxiety out for a bit and giving your body not just a break, but in fact a really positive experience that helps it sort of heal. So Sanjiv said, physician, heal thyself. This is how you heal yourself. And it sounds kind of funny, but the example I give is if you can have karaoke night with your family, where you're all singing silly songs and laughing at each other and being together as a family, if you could schedule that for an hour a week or a half an hour a week to just spend time with your family, laughing, singing, and being together, that will be huge for you. It will really help you feel reinvigorated when you now have to go back to work. So that's the weird kind of medicine and therapy I'm suggesting to you, is find these things that make you feel good and then realize they have the power to help you heal from the anxiety that you're feeling every day. There's a fifth one, and it sounds easy, but it's not. But it's relates to another thing we've stolen from the Eastern traditions, which is meditation. Meditation, what it involves is learning how to slow your whole body and relax your whole body. What you're really doing with meditation is you're calling your parasympathetic system, that rest and digest system. You're kind of summoning that. And when you do that, you're basically banishing anxiety and replacing it with this relaxed state. So that's one example of how to do that, meditation. There's also online, you could look for what are called guided relaxation files, and somebody will just walk you through this process of clenching muscles and then relaxing them and feeling how great it feels when it's relaxed. And doing that from your feet to your legs, all the way up through your body. And by the end of this, you feel very, very relaxed. If you can learn what it feels like to really feel relaxed, and if you can learn to pull that over your body, you can't be in both fight and flight and rest and digest at the same time. You're in one or the other. So if you don't want to be in fight or flight, the best way to get rid of fight or flight is to replace it with rest and digest. So if you can pull the rest and digest, if you can pull the relaxation over you, that will literally banish the anxiety and give you a chance to have a little bit of a break there. Okay. So last thing I'm just saying, obviously your jobs are extremely stressful. I do want to take a moment to say thank you. Thank you for all you are doing for your own countrymen, but the world is in this situation together, and you healthcare professionals are just, you hear the term heroes, etc., but I don't know how often you get sincere thanks. And so I would really like to thank you for all you're doing. This is a really difficult time for all of you guys. And I'll also just mention as a last kind of thing that I do have these 2 courses on Coursera. If you would like to learn more in depth, today was sort of a taste, but one is just meant for the general population. So you and your family, perhaps, if you want to watch this one. This other one is much more specifically made for healthcare workers. And so 2 different courses, if you want, where we talk about specific strategies. For example, one of the things Taranjeet mentioned, and I just remembered it now, unfortunately, is she said, other things we sometimes have numbers. We can know, where we're at by numbers, but mental health, we don't see anybody's mental health. There are some great online tools where you can, where it asks you about certain symptoms. Are you experiencing this? Are you experiencing that? And it tells you kind of where you are on that Hans Selye thing. Like, oh, you're, you need to give yourself a break or whatnot. So we talk about some of those tools in this course for self-help and such as well. So I just wanted to mention those 2. If you want to look into those, just go to Coursera.org and search my name. Okay. Cool. So that's it for my formal part. I also wanted to give you my email address here at the bottom. And so if you wanted to reach out to me directly, feel free to do so. Not a problem. I am ridiculously busy, but I always try to get back as quick as I can. So please feel free. And otherwise, I'm just happy to answer any questions that any of you have at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Sanjiv, we can't hear you.
Yeah, I try to mute my myself because you can hear a lot of background noises. So yeah, so thank you, Steve. That was a lot of information in a very short time, and I mean we could have gone on and on and on about we have a lot of questions in mind, and there may not be many from the I don't see many from the audience, but there are a few that that springs to my mind.
Okay.
I mean, in a capsule, how you've been talking about how to relieve yourself of stress and how to be stress free. How best do we do that? I mean, it's something which always comes to our mind. I mean, we get back from work or we're going into work. These are 2 stressful situations for us. When you get back from work, it is stressless, but when we go into work, it is stressful. So how do we handle that?
Yeah, cool. And by the way, I've just seen something in the chat too. So please feel free to ask any questions in the chat if you'd like, anybody. But yeah, it is, I mean, so I sometimes break it down to these 2 things, which really brings in the idea of mindfulness and then what I call intentional scheduling. So the mindfulness at first, we tend to notice our mind is drawn to negative. It's the amygdala. The amygdala is always looking for threat. And so we're always aware of all the negatives. It's harder for us to be aware that when we're feeling good, we don't naturally kind of think about that. But that's one of the keys I suggest is to try to become mindful of those experiences, those things in our life that make us feel good at the end. And you can try these experimentally. So let me give you one example. One of the things I will claim that should be helpful is if you can connect with someone who you feel, really cares about you and that who you really care about as well. You can talk to them about anything. It doesn't really matter. So, pick any subject you want and say, hey, can we just have a phone call and talk about this for a half an hour, whatever it is. When we talk on the phone, two things happen. There's the words we say, but then there's the sounds we make. And those sounds we make is us communicating at an emotional level. So if I was talking to Sanjiv and let's say this was a time when there wasn't a vaccine yet and people were supposed to be keeping their distance. And if I told him a story and said on the phone, and I said, I was walking and all these young people walked right towards me and they wouldn't let me by. And I had to go and I had to walk right through all of these young people. And it was really scary. And if Sanjiv just went, if he just made that noise, what does that noise mean? That noise means, first of all, he was listening to me. He was hearing what I said. And in fact, he was kind of living it with me. He was there with me and he experienced the emotion that I experienced, which was a frustration kind of emotion. And that sharing of the emotion just tells me that Sanjiv cares, and those sounds we make to each other are more important than the words. They show that we're listening and they show that we care. And my prediction to you is if you try that, even a 15, 20-minute phone call with somebody, and then as you hang up the phone, ask yourself, do I feel better right now? How am I feeling mentally? And if you find that does make you feel better, and I think it will, as I think singing or dancing or a lot of those other things would, then you say, okay, you know what? Every now and then I'm going to schedule a call with these people I care about. And this is me taking care of myself. So I'm going to take a half an hour, I'm going to take 15 minutes, and I'm just going to talk to my old mentor that I always love to talk to, or I'm going to talk to whoever. And so when you find these things, schedule them in and see them as necessary breaks from the anxiety, that every now and then I just got to get away. Whatever you do, don't feel guilty about getting away. This is the funny, weird thing some people have. Yeah, but I have so much I should be doing. Well, yeah, you do. And if you want to do that well, you have to be at your best. And every now and then that means stopping and recharging. So find those things that recharge you, schedule them, and don't feel guilty about using them. So I'm just seeing one in chat here. I read this post on social media, which says only 74 days till 2022, and most of us are still living in 2019. It feels like this time is missing, like it was stolen from us. To put in terms of an MDS postgraduate residency, what my contemporaries and I feel is that we remember being first-year residents and now the residency is almost over. How do we accept and move on from the pseudo-amnesia? I mean, it is really true that so many people, they're sort of experience. Like I think of all these high school students that don't get to do graduations the way that we think of graduations, and you not being able to do your residency in the way. It is tough. So part of that amnesia is your fight or flight system, literally sort of, kicking in, and you're in emergency mode all the time. So your memory works a little differently when you're in that sort of stress mode as well. And so that's part of what's feeding into this. But yeah, I mean, how do we accept and move on? The good news is we're very good at doing that. I mean, if we can manage our anxiety, it's amazing how able we are to adapt to new situations. And so I don't know if there's a key. I'm trying to think of, a really nice, easy answer for you. And there isn't a nice, easy answer. It really is about doing the best we can every day, being the best us we can every day, and just hoping we get on the other side of this. There may be a silver lining when we get on the other side of this, in the sense that we've learned how difficult things can be. Your medical profession is going to be easier than you know it right now. I mean, these people in residency, I can't imagine, welcome to the medical profession, right into crisis mode. It will be good for them to see what the medical profession was like before the pandemic, where it's still stressful. But for those students, it might seem much much easier than the experience that they've had. So going through all this stress, and especially if you learn some ways of coping with it, they may serve you well through the rest of your career, which hopefully will not be as traumatic as the last 2 years have been. Yeah, so not a great answer for you, I'm afraid, but that's the best I have.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up, Steve, because I mean, I can see that people have been, kind of thrown into the deep side of the pool uh, at this stage where,
Yeah,
you are made to cope with things that you never imagined you would in your, I mean, how often do you come across a situation like the last 2 years?
yeah,
Maybe once in your generation. So,
yeah.
or maybe, never. So it's something that you either learn from, or you earn from, or you deal with it at the end of the day. So yeah, you're very
Yeah, I
correct.
mean,
Yeah, it's
yeah,
it's
and
something that
that is the tough thing, right? Where you want to learn from it, you don't want to burn out. Like you don't want to get to that point where you feel like, okay, I just can't cope with it. But this is a lot to cope with, right? We talk about a body burning out, we talk about people feeling weak. I mean, this is really a lot of anxiety. It's a big ask we're asking of all of you guys, and the fact that you're able to stick with it as long as you have it is amazing. But I do hope you learn these tools, because this is one of the things I like to say about the pandemic. We like to talk about mental health issues as though it's somebody else's problem. Yeah, other people struggle with that, not me. If you haven't felt what I just described to you in this talk, if you haven't felt anxiety over the last year, you are some superhuman being. I think we all feel anxiety now, and so it's easier for us all to say, yeah. There's times when I feel exhausted, like I showed in that graph. There's times I don't know if I can keep doing this. We all kind of know that feeling now. So why don't we understand what it is and see if we can manage it pretty well? So instead of the world pushing our mind here and there, and then our body taking the brunt of that, can we learn to sort of select how we interact with the world in ways that bring in more positive and have us ready then to deal with the negative? Because the negative is going to be there. You're not going to escape the negative, but you need to counterweigh that. You need some positive so that you get those flush of hormones into your body.
So one of the things, Steve, is apart from the pandemic itself, many a time we are encountered with what is known as bereavement
Yeah.
counseling, and telling a very uh, close person that the your relative has passed away, and then we find that quite difficult. So how do I mean? Are there any solutions to that, or is there a way to do it? Something that would be helpful to
Yeah.
us. Yeah.
It is such a difficult situation, because to some extent, your profession asks you to also manage your empathy, in the sense that, so empathy, just to be clear, empathy is the sharing of an emotional state with another human being, and you're often dealing with people who are feeling scared, who are feeling threatened by whatever their medical condition is, and they want you to be the calm professional. That's usually your role, is to be a little less emotionally connected. And again, I said usually the family can be the emotional connection, and you're the professional with the expertise that comes in. But when you have to do that bereavement, now we want you to change really quick. We want you to become the human being, and not be so distant, but to seem and to feel much more close. And that's difficult, because if you were as close to every patient as that family would love you to be when you're giving the bereavement, they want to think that you loved their family member. But if you love their family as deeply as they wish you would, it would be so hard for you to deal with every passing patient. If everyone you love like a family member, you would be losing a family member on such a regular basis. It would just be breaking your heart. And so your psychology learns to get a distance from the patients. But now you have to talk to the family members, and you have to not look like you have that distance. And so it's a very difficult thing to do. Now, how do you do it well? I mean, I think there's something in psychology we call active listening, that often when people are feeling really stressed, they just want to be heard. So obviously you have to go and give them the news. That part, I don't know what to tell you other than, you just go out and give them the news. But from that point onward, if it feels like the family wants to say something, the very best thing you can try to do is be a really good listener. And that means literally, so putting your own ego away and just letting them say what they want to say and listening in a very non-judgmental way. Whatever they say, to sort of resonate with and say yes, and make them feel like they're being heard. You can ask them questions. Maybe even, a strange thing would be to ask them questions about the deceased person a little bit. Let them talk about that deceased person a little bit and share a little bit of them with you. That might make them feel good. It may be hard for you though, because, again, you have this challenge. How well do you want to know these people if some of them are going to pass away under your care? It's a very difficult emotional place to be, and the bereavement, I think, is where that all comes together, and you have to look at a family member, and it's very difficult. And so, yeah, I can imagine leaving the office after doing that. And
on a lighter note, I remember walking out of the intensive care unit and speaking to a patient's husband and telling him that everything is fine, but she has got a bad lung, so we have to deal with that. And he turning around and telling me that the weakest part of a chain is its the strongest part of a chain is its weakest link. So
that's not being helpful.
So it's tough. Yeah, it's
tough. Yeah.
Yeah, you sometimes come across people who are much more aware about the situation than you are.
Right,
In terms of the situation.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the other part too. With a family, you don't know how they're going to react. We all react to things in different ways, and you have no idea how a family person is going to react. And so it puts you in an awkward position. And that's what I think I would let them have the lead. Let them determine how things go after you tell them the news, and just try to be as human as you can without absorbing too much.
We have a very interesting question, Steve, before we run out of the time. What happens in India, we have a very strict hierarchical system in organizations, So if you are lower in the hierarchical system, the subordinates sometimes feel a lot of stress and anxiety because of our superiors. And the superiors are not very welcoming and forthcoming people. So in your suggestions, at one place you suggested that, avoid the stressors, avoid the people who give you stress. But when you are at a workplace and your boss is, so difficult person to work with, and
Mhm.
you can't stop working, because you have to do your job. How can you avoid that situation? So without changing your environment, what change can you bring inside of you so that you are better equipped to handle such difficult conditions and people? I think that's the question.
Yeah. So, and there's an
That's
implicit
been
part
my
about.
experience as well. I think that's a major cause of burnout.
Yep.
You have a leader who is not listening to you. Yeah.
Absolutely. So when we were talking about chronic stress, that is a classic example of chronic stress, in the sense that, sometimes it feels like, what can I do about it? I have to put myself in this stressful situation. That person is going to be there. And it is going to cause me to feel all these negative emotions. So sometimes I've had something implicit in my advice, but now let me be a little more explicit about it. Every now and then in psychology, we will get a question: how do I deal with that negative state? And what can I do mentally to prepare myself? And the answer sometimes surprises people a little bit, but it's this: try not to focus on the negative state. Try to focus on its opposite. So let me give you a couple of examples from psychology how we use this, and we can even go to weight loss. Some people say, I want to lose weight, but I eat all this bad food. How could I eat less bad food? And what we tell them is, buy more good food. So if you fill your kitchen with good food and you have it around and you eat the good food, you're just not going to be as hungry for the bad food. So don't put the focus on the bad food, put it on the behavior you want. So in your case, that boss is making you feel all these negative mental states. Can you do something when you leave that boss and go into your office and put yourself in a positive mental state? Can you sort of stop that? Because here's what happens is we have those interactions and they get us anxious, But as we walk away, we carry it with us. We keep reliving the interaction, and so we keep feeling that anxiety. If we can go into our office, and here's a silly idea, but put on a song that we love from when we were teenagers, and maybe if no one's looking, even dance around a little bit or sing along with it a little bit, we can suddenly find, I just say that and you smile and you look happier. You can use strategies like that. Like I have to have that interaction. I have to go in and talk to my boss about whatever. I know it's not going to be pleasant, so I'll go do that and I'll go deal with it. But when I come back, I'm going to try to put my mind in that positive state. And by doing that, that kind of pushes the boss away without focusing on the boss. Because if you think about that interaction, it's going to be stressful. But if you can bring your mind somewhere else to another place, then that's sort of the best you can do. So it's kind of like what we sometimes call a cognitive palate cleanser. When you eat, if you ate something that had a bad taste, you want to eat something else to get that bad taste out of your mouth. And so that sort of idea, you're in a negative situation. Can you put your mind into a positive situation? With music is extremely powerful, by the way, for doing that. So yeah, please send it.
Steve, I for myself, what I do, because I work with a very difficult boss, Dr. Sanjiv is aware of that. What I have done is I have put some notes on my noteboard, these positive notes. So whenever I enter my office, the first thing that I do is I read these notes. And whenever I come back from his office, I read these notes back again. And, one of the notes which I have written is lions roar and dogs bark. So every time when I come back from that meeting, I read that note and I feel, okay, comfortable. This is good. So I feel that, yes. And I also like not everybody in the department is bad or unhealthy. So I like to interact more with those people with whom I feel positive or who reciprocate in a very positive manner to my suggestions. And, keeping the interactions to bare minimum is also a good idea, to avoid unnecessary interaction. Yeah.
So let me talk a couple of things. So a couple of things on that. So one thing to realize too is everybody is stressed now. So even that person that's making you anxious is probably anxious. And so to have a little bit of sort of humanity that they're probably going through some difficult times as well is good. But with respect to speaking to other people, I want to once again talk about that listening. This is so powerful, active listening. And if you look online, you can find out a lot of information about it. If you can spend time with other people that are important to you, that you think they're helpful to you mentally, one of the things you can do for each other is to spend time just listening. And so often when we talk, you have something to say and you say it. While you're saying it, I'm thinking about what I want to say. And so you stop and then I say what. So it's like you, me. With active listening, you put yourself away and you say, it's all about you. So I could spend some time with you and just say, tell me more about what it's like with your boss. How does that make you feel? What do you do afterwards? And when you get the chance to just tell the story and tell somebody, how you're feeling and why you're feeling it, it is important it's amazing how powerful that is. We all just wish people would understand us, would just know how we felt. And when someone takes the time to say, I want to know that, I want to listen to that. Forget about me. Let's talk about you and how you feel. And then sometimes at the end of that, you can trade, right? Okay, that was great. Can I tell a little bit about how I'm feeling? Absolutely. And if you trade off and you find some people in your life that you can speak to in that way, that will listen to you and that you will listen to, they will become very, very powerful for your mental health. They really help you feel like you're not alone, that you're sharing in this anxiety and stress. And so often we can feel like it's just us. And it absolutely isn't. So yeah, culture, the right relationships, the right connections, and then try to engage with those in ways that will be helpful to you both.
Yeah, Steve, it sounds like the Sound of Silence by Simon and Garfunkel. Yeah, it's so poignant, isn't it?
Did you mean the actual songs?
There's one more question. Arshita is asking whom to reach out when there is no one to understand our situation.
Yeah, I mean, I know this is more difficult in India. So, in my part of the world, every organization has somebody in place that you can go and help with. They're often called wellness managers, things like that. But I suspect in India, it's not. I hear it's much more like come on, suck it up, do your best, you can handle it, be tough or go away. And that's a difficult way to be. And so a little bit, I would suggest that same thing. Do you know anybody in your situation who is a good listener? So some people just are naturally. We can all learn this skill, and it's very valuable to learn how to listen, but some people just are. And if you know somebody like that, or if you know somebody that you think might be feeling what you're feeling, then engaging in that sort of interaction we just talked about, Taranjeet and I, where you can say, hey, can I just tell you, or sometimes it's good to start with them, by the way. You want to talk for a while? How are you feeling? Would you like to share anything about your situation? And sometimes when you start with them, they feel so good being able to communicate with you, then they're very happy to have you do the best. If you can find even that one or two people to share the experience with, that could be very powerful. Now, hopefully there's people you can reach out to, and on the wider internet, there should be, if you really feel, so we didn't talk about this very much, but let me talk about this now. Sanjiv began by talking about suicide in the medical profession, a paper that Taranjeet had found. When we think about that Hans-Selye curve and that exhaustion, that's where you get that what's called learned helplessness feeling. You start to feel like, I've been fighting this thing for so long, fighting. I just can't fight it anymore. I'm just exhausted. And that's the beginning of a depressive sort of state and potentially suicidal thoughts, those sorts of things. That's when they kick in. So, a couple of things to keep in mind. If you're feeling there, then it is time to try to find some stigma, mental health. We would be telling you, absolutely connect with a professional at that point in time. There are therapeutic techniques that can be used that can help somebody in that situation. In India, that's going to be challenging. So I would really recommend finding peers, and you can see those people who are reaching the exhaustion stage, the people you work with, and ask them to tell you their story, form that connection, and become sort of buddies. We sometimes talk about this buddy system, where if you're going through something with a buddy, it's not nearly as tough as when you feel like you're going through it alone. Taranjeet, I know you wanted to jump on. Yeah.
That's exactly, Steve, you said that we should continue this connection and communication that we have developed. And in India, as you rightly said, by the way, your internet is stuff. In India, we don't have a peer group or support group culture as of now. And I was just thinking that if you could help us in developing an experimental peer group amongst our fraternity, so that we could. Are you still there?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. Oh, sorry. My image is locked.
Video is stuck. Yeah, image is locked. So I was just wondering if that would be a good idea, because as Arshita mentioned, whom to talk to. If we have a peer group, even if it's online, I think that would be very nice. If 6 or 7 of us come together every once in a while, let's say once in 2 weeks, and just talk, just share what we have been through.
Yep. That is certainly one of the things that has been shown to be very helpful time and time again, is the idea of people coming together who are sharing a common experience, and just knowing and hearing those other people tell stories where it's like, oh, they understand me. They're feeling what I'm feeling. That is so important to us, to feel like we're not alone in those situations. So absolutely, we could do that. By the way, let me mention, in that healthcare course we talked about, I co-teach it with Dr. Heather Gordon, who's from the University Health Network here. She works in the hospitals here. Every hospital here has something called a respite center during COVID. And I know this is probably a foreign idea here, but just to give you a sense of how seriously they're taking mental health in Canada, there is this place in every hospital where you can go to essentially get away from the hospital. So it's a place that has some snacks. It has what they call a gratitude wall, where people who want to say thanks to the healthcare workers, there's cards of people saying thanks to each other. There's a place where you can go listen to some music and do various activities. There's yoga balls and stuff if you want to spend a little bit of time doing. By the way, that's another great thing. Aerobic activity of any sort is really great for keeping you feeling mentally strong as well. So they have these centers in hospitals here specifically to allow a person who's feeling like they just need a break to be able to walk down the hall, but kind of go into a different world, a world that's much more parasympathetic. It's around their parasympathetic system. So it's around relaxing, digesting, that sort of thing. It would be fantastic to see that in India. Obviously, that might take us a while to get to that step, but if we could bring, part of that is a peer group that you can join. So there are some respite centers you could see what other hospitals are doing, and then we could talk about what is reasonable to actually bring into the Indian healthcare context. But that's where I would love
don't
to.
you think even if it does not happen at the government level or state level, but you being a leader of an association or an organization, in small parts, just small parts, wherever the leaders are more aware and enlightened, I think they can start bringing this change in a very small way. I think that's pretty much possible. All of us can create a healthy environment for our peers and our juniors, right? What do you think, sir? Sir, are you listening?
Perhaps not.
There's a problem. All right. So what I wanted to ask you, Steve, one last question before we wind up. You spoke a lot about we sharing empathy with our patients. What about compassionate fatigue? Sometimes we just are so tired of being compassionate and we go through that fatigue. I think that is vicarious traumatization is the word that you used. You did not use that word, right? Because that's what
I did not, but yeah, I mean,
the
absolutely.
BP, yeah.
When you're around other people who are feeling strong emotions, we naturally share those emotions. It's a very powerful system we have. It helps us be what we call pro-social, helps us, humans are social more than any other creature on this planet. And it's things like that, empathy. When we see somebody in pain, we feel a little bit of pain. When we see someone who's sad, we feel a little bit of sadness. But yeah, that's all, those strong negative emotions are chronic stressors. So they're yet another one. If you're feeling all this compassion, all this empathy with other people, it is going to be part of those stimuli that make you feel exhausted and bring you to that point. And when you're exhausted, you will not be good at things like we've been talking about, the bereavement stuff, the compassion fatigue, because it's kind of like you reach a point where you just don't care. You're just so burnt out. And now when you have somebody who needs you to be a caring, loving human being, you just might not be capable of kind of bringing that up anymore. And that becomes problematic, of course, because that's what they need at that time. So, these are all reasons why we don't want to reach that point. We don't want to reach that exhaustion point. We want to try before that to do things to keep us strong, to keep us able to not reach that exhaustion point. Once we reach that exhaustion point, then we really want to start talking to people and getting some form of help for ourselves. Maybe it's just a peer. I say that just a peer. I don't like that I said it that way now, because I think, one friend who understands what you're going through and goes through it with you is hugely important.
Yeah.
Very important.
Yeah.
So not just a peer. A peer is a powerful
Not
thing.
just a peer.
If we can add
completely agree
it
with
to
that.
three, then we have a support group, and then that's really, really powerful. Yeah. Fantastic.
Sanjeev sir, would you like to say
Yeah,
something?
no, I think, Steve, probably this is the beginning of a conversation, not the end of it.
I hope so.
So yeah, I think we should have more such sessions where it's important to address what has been brushed under the carpet for so long, and we are looking forward to more interactions in the future. I think Taranjit also would agree with it, and she would be,
Certainly, sir.
yeah, she
I
would
proposed
be
already
very,
that we should have a peer group,
yeah.
online peer group, which I want to do with Steve if possible.
So, like you said, you are overburdened and uh, busy, but you will be even more burdened by another group of people. So, thank you. It was very enlightening and very, you kind of dumbed it down to basics of things that we would understand about mental health care, and it was really fantastic. So, look forward to interacting with you more in the future. Thank you,
Thank you.
Steve.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. And thank you everyone for attending this session with us and it's been an encouragement. And I hope that future for Indian doctors and worldwide is better than what we
This
experience.
is a recorded version, isn't it, Taranjit?
Yes,
Because I am
yes, sir.
really hoping that more and more people actually see it and
Yes,
maybe care to interact with
benefit. Yeah, yeah.
Steve and his
Mm,
what do you call it? His work for mental health of doctors and police officers.
yeah.
Yeah. Who also share a lot of the same stuff.
Yes,
Very
yeah.
stressful job in a culture of where mental health is, where everyone's supposed to be strong all the time, and that's hard to do when you have a very stressful job. It's impossible. Yeah.
So it's
Let's all live
interesting.
healthy together.
One last question, Steve. I saw in that paper which was shared that the mental health, depression, and suicides are higher among doctors than actually combat personnel. So,
Yeah.
is it a question of saving life and losing life, or
Yeah.
destroying life? I mean, how do you look at it?
Yeah, no, I mean, and they're very different stresses, right? Because often the combat, they have very stressful, when you're in a battle, that's very stressful. But then a lot of times you're just hanging around, not doing much. Whereas the doctor's life, I think every day you are being cognitively challenged. Even before the pandemic, you probably had all of these stresses and anxieties. And then with the pandemic, it's every day. So I think you guys are feeling a whole lot more chronic stress. And that's the one that causes the trouble. It's when you just can't get the break. And that's when you have to start making your own breaks, finding your own ways to get away every now and then. Yeah.
I
I think
guess,
with
I
that,
guess,
yeah, Steve,
no,
thanks a lot.
thank you. Thank you so much. If you want to impart health to others, the idea is to be healthy first, right?
Absolutely. 100%.
Yes, yeah.
It's been a real pleasure meeting you all. I look forward to our future interactions. And yeah, all the best
Us
as you
too.
deal
Yeah.
with what is just a horrible and terrible challenge. But thank you for all you do. And one day we will be on the other side of this.
I'm sure we will be together. Thank you so much, everyone, for this
Thank
wonderful
you.
evening. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Taranjit.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.